bronze door closes. The echo travels the length of a marble corridor and dies somewhere in the dark. Torches flicker against painted walls. Outside, Rome roars with celebration. Music, wagers, the thunder of a crowd entertained. Inside, a girl no older than 16 stares at the floor. Her father stands several steps away. He does not speak. He does not move. He understands something that cannot be said aloud. In this palace, silence is survival. The emperor has made a gesture, and that gesture cannot be refused. Rome would later call him mad, but madness alone does not build a system where fathers lower their eyes and the most powerful men in the empire pretend not to see. This is not only the story of one ruler, it is the story of how absolute power reshapes everyone around it, how institutions bend, how fear becomes routine, and how an empire that prided itself on law and honour learned to look away. When Gaius Caesar, remembered by history as Caligula, took power in 37 AD, Rome believed it was witnessing a restoration. He was young, charismatic, the son of the adored general Germanicus. Crowds once wept at his father's funeral. Soldiers had carried the boy through camps in miniature boots, giving him the nickname that followed him into history. After the long and suspicious final years of Tiberius, Rome was desperate for renewal. Political prisoners were released, public games returned. Generosity flowed from the treasury, the Senate exhaled. For a few months, optimism felt safe. Then the emperor nearly died. Ancient writers describe a sudden violent illness late in his first year. When he recovered, something shifted. Whether disease altered his mind or power simply removed restraint, no physician can now diagnose what followed. But Rome felt it. The young prince who once smiled at crowds began demanding something more than loyalty. He demanded reverence. Temples rose to his image. Senators were required to treat him not merely as ruler, but as divine. Ritual blurred into obedience, ceremony hardened into submission, and the palace changed. Imperial banquets had always been political theatre, alliances forged over wine, influence measured in seating arrangements. Under Caligula, they became examinations. Invitations were commands. Attendance implied gratitude. Wives and daughters were expected to accompany Rome's elite. Rank determined proximity to the emperor. Proximity determined visibility. Visibility invited scrutiny. Ancient historians such as Suetonius and Cassius Dio describe scenes that are difficult to read without discomfort. The emperor would openly evaluate the appearance of a senator's wife across the dining hall. He would summon her mid-meal. Conversation would pause, then resume. No one protested, not because they approved, because objection required unity, and unity required trust. And trust had been carefully dismantled long before. Rome liked to imagine itself a republic at heart. Even under emperors, the Senate still met. Laws were debated, titles were preserved, but power had migrated quietly. Under Augustus, the structures of republican government remained outwardly intact, while military loyalty shifted toward a single household. The Praetorian Guard, elite soldiers stationed in Rome, were paid directly by the emperor. Their allegiance was personal. Under Tiberius, treason trials moved increasingly into imperial control. Fear of accusation discouraged dissent. By the time Caligula inherited authority, resistance had already been proceduralized out of existence. He did not invent the mechanism, he intensified it. At banquets, humiliation became currency. Some men who endured disgrace later received promotions. Others were fined or publicly ridiculed without clear reason. Reward and punishment alternated unpredictably. Randomness isolates. If consequences follow a pattern, people coordinate. If consequences are arbitrary, everyone calculates alone. This is how compliance becomes rational. There were whispers of conspiracy as early as 39 AD. Several senators were accused of plotting against the emperor. Executions followed, exile followed, families were implicated. The message was unmistakable. Opposition would not remain contained to the individual. Fear extended beyond politics into intimacy. Marriage contracts from the era hint at anxieties over imperial access. Alliances were negotiated with unspoken realities in mind. Families maneuvered not only for status, but for protection. Some may have sought imperial favour, convincing themselves proximity to power meant security. Others simply endured. The Praetorian Guard stood at the threshold of every imperial chamber. They escorted, guarded, enforced. They were not neutral observers. Their elevated pay and privileged status tied their fortunes directly to the emperor's survival. Yet even loyalty has a breaking point. Among the officers was Cassius Chaerea, a seasoned soldier reportedly mocked by the emperor in public. Ancient sources describe humiliations directed at him, insults that struck not at his politics, but his masculinity and honour. Humiliation corrodes differently than fear. Fear can be managed, humiliation lingers. By early 41 AD, a small circle within the guard resolved to act. No grand republican restoration was promised. No manifesto survives. Only fragments suggest exhaustion. On January 24th, during public games, the emperor moved through a private corridor beneath the Palatine Hill. In that narrow passage, blades were drawn. Accounts vary in detail, but all agree on the violence. Caligula fell beneath repeated strikes. Chaos erupted. His German bodyguards arrived too late. In the confusion, his wife and young daughter were killed. Whether as calculated necessity or panicked brutality, their deaths ensured no immediate heir could claim vengeance. When news reached the Senate, debate flared briefly. Some proposed restoring the Republic. For a few hours, history seemed to hesitate, but hesitation requires force behind it. The Praetorian Guard found Caligula's uncle, Claudius, hiding within the palace complex. They proclaimed him emperor. In return, he promised them a substantial donative, an unprecedented financial reward. The Senate ratified what the soldiers had already decided. The Republic was not restored. It was not even seriously attempted. Chaerea and fellow conspirators were eventually executed under Claudius. Killing an emperor could not become precedent. Order required punishment. Rome declared the previous reign an aberration. Statues were removed, decrees annulled. The narrative shifted toward madness, toward a single, unstable man whose excesses could be safely contained in biography. Madness is convenient. It isolates blame. But historians know the pattern did not end in 41 AD. Under Claudius, political manipulation continued, albeit less theatrically. Under Nero, allegations of domestic violence and public cruelty resurfaced. Later emperors would blur spectacle and governance in new ways. Caligula's reign was extreme, but not solitary. The more unsettling truth is structural. An empire that commanded legions across 3 continents could not protect dignity within its own capital. The Senate, composed of men who governed provinces and controlled wealth beyond imagination, adapted to humiliation rather than risk annihilation. This is not unique to Rome. Systems built on concentrated power often produce the same psychology. When careers, families, and lives hinge on proximity to a single figure, silence becomes pragmatic. Over time, pragmatism feels like normality. Ancient sources preserve names of emperors, generals, conspirators. The women summoned to those banquets are mostly shadows, referenced indirectly, occasionally identified, often erased. We know of imperial wives such as Caesonia because her death intersected with assassination. We know of aristocratic women mentioned in passing by historians because they later remarried or were exiled. But the majority remain footnotes to male narratives. Property records show abrupt transfers. Inscriptions skip generations. Dowries appear and disappear in archival fragments. The gaps speak even when the texts do not. Caligula ruled less than 4 years. That brevity tempts dismissal. Yet those years reveal how quickly institutions hollow when fear replaces principle, how swiftly public virtue yields to private calculation, how easily a society convinces itself that endurance equals wisdom. Rome survived him, but survival is not the same as integrity. After his assassination, life in the capital resumed. Markets reopened. Senators attended sessions. The palace doors did not remain shut for long. The machinery of empire requires continuity. It rarely pauses for moral reckoning. When we examine Caligula today, we must resist two temptations: sensationalism and absolution. Sensationalism reduces history to grotesque spectacle. Absolution reduces it to pathology. The more difficult task is understanding how environment shapes behavior, how incentives reward silence, how unpredictability fractures solidarity, how humiliation can be weaponized as effectively as violence. The Roman Empire projected strength through architecture, military discipline, and law. Yet inside its marble halls, power often operated through intimacy and fear. That contradiction is what endures. Not simply the cruelty of one emperor, but the willingness of an elite class to normalize what once would have been unthinkable. If this story unsettles you, it should. Not because it is ancient, but because its dynamics are timeless. History does not repeat in costume, it repeats in structure. When authority becomes untouchable, when institutions depend on favor rather than accountability, when personal survival overrides collective principle, systems begin to drift. Rome drifted long before Caligula. He merely exposed the current. If you value deeply researched explorations of history's darker corridors, the moments where power reveals its most uncomfortable truths, consider subscribing. And tell us in the comments, what disturbed you most? The emperor's behavior, the Senate's silence, or the realization that entire systems can adapt to almost anything if enough people decide looking away is safer than speaking up. There are more chapters like this, figures and events that shape the world not only through conquest, but through the psychology of power, and we're only just beginning to open those doors.